Leeds City Council already has a number of admirable sustainability measures in place, and recently they pledged to cut emissions by 40% by 2020. But I'm not convinced that the one will deliver the other, so I want to explore a more root and branch approach. At the moment, Leeds lies at number 6 in the Sustainability League table, but even Newcastle at number 1 is a million miles from being truly sustainable. So what are the key priorities that we need to address if Leeds is to change from being seriously urban to sustainably herbal?
The key ingredients really of a really truly sustainable city, I think, are the following. So a real localisation of food production.
Well, certainly if we can bring as much of our food in from the surrounding area and not transport potatoes from Scotland or Egypt.
1/4 of all lorry miles in the country are moving food, 1/2 of which are empty.
If anything fails to a supermarket, we only really have about 2 days worth of goods there. Whereas if there is a variety of shops in the area, or if people are growing their own things, the likelihood of survival is greater.
If we were doing this 30 years ago, there would be probably 100% more people who knew how to do vegetable growing, or even knew that vegetables grow in the ground. So the key priority is education.
A big priority for me would be to regain soil health.
Land and access to land, and getting land to stop growing horses for the middle classes to use. Ponies, I hope I've offended half of you. Good.
All the sort of the area of it, whether it be surface area, roof area, wall space, has to accumulate energy, whether it be food energy or solar energy or wind energy.
Must remember health and well-being.
Take cars off the road and get people walking reduces carbon emissions.
Transport system needs to be improved, housing stock needs to be retrofitted.
We should be producing carbon neutral buildings, and we're not using renewable and passive energy as much as we should do.
The democratic basis of the city is really important. A sustainable city is a truly democratic one.
Social justice and equity, I think, is a really critical issue.
I think the final aspect is really looking at the way the economy of the city. How does the economy function?
It goes without saying that those priorities are not going to be easy to achieve in a city like Leeds, but they might just be viable in a small market town like Chipping Norton. So perhaps one approach might be to view cities as if they were a group of market towns. It sounds fanciful, but there is one theoretical model which does exactly that, and it can accommodate most of our priorities because it dates from a time before cars, when even large cities could feed themselves from the local countryside. This is Letchworth, the first town to be built, partially at least, to principles invented by another of my ancestors, my great-grandfather's first cousin, Ebenezer Howard.
I very much think the time has come for a fundamental re-examination of Howard's ideas and those of his contemporaries.
Howard's plan was to internalise the Victorian externalities of slum, smoke and disease by attracting people to what he called the town country, an herbal concept if ever there was one, so that the old cities would die and could then be reborn. His Greenfield utopia had 3 main elements.
One was a physical concept of building a self-contained garden city, which would contain homes and jobs in the same place and would be surrounded by generous green open space. It was to be built at reasonably high densities, but interspersed with very large amounts of public open space, particularly around the town centre, and then in a sort of broad midway park. He even included an incredible circular shopping mall, which he called the Crystal Palace, within easy walking distance for everyone.
Well, we don't need any more malls, though glass houses for growing veg might work. But it wasn't just about food.
Also, playing areas and recreation areas, especially for children. Everyone could get to work, could get to shop, could get to school, and could get to all kinds of recreation within a few minutes' walk. And finally, the town was to own the green belt around it, which was to be managed not merely for agriculture, but for a very wide variety of social purposes for people in the towns.
But the garden city was only one part of Howard's invention.
He envisaged that if the garden city was successful and there was a need for extension, then another garden city would be started, and then another and another and another, and they'd be linked together into what he called a social city. As the Garden City grew into social city, the intermunicipal railway would provide a very efficient way of moving people around.
It looked wonderful on paper, but Howard knew that the physical plan wouldn't be enough.
There was also a very important social element to all this, that in effect each garden city was to be a self-governing commonwealth. Over time, the rents from the garden city would actually pay back the investors their money, and thereafter the rents would in effect produce a local welfare state. In the famous diagram of the three magnets, there are a couple of words at the bottom which many people think probably is sort of decorative rhetoric: freedom, cooperation. But they weren't decorative or rhetoric. They really meant something very important. They meant that the people in the garden city, the citizens, would have total freedom to control their own city, not merely democratically, but economically, through a cooperative system.
But sadly, this never happened.
Howard essentially failed in his central mission. Although Letchworth and Welwyn are glorious monuments, they failed in their central purpose of creating this cooperative commonwealth that Howard envisaged. The reason was the industrialists who were bankrolling him struck a very hard bargain.
In other words, the movement was defeated by demand for capital growth, but that wouldn't happen in a steady state economy. Let's just compare the 19th century theory with 21st century reality. By chance, they're both about the same size. Howard, however, was catering for just 250,000, while Leeds has a population of nearly 780. So obviously there's no way we can feed everyone from within the city limits as Howard hoped to do. Or is there? New research by architects Viljoen and Bowen suggests there may be a way it can be done, and it goes under the unlikely name of sepals.